Hi, people. I'm trying this for the third time. I needed to wait for approval from the admin. Is anyone there? I can see one person, two people. I'm really sorry for the delay. I was here at 8 o'clock, but there was some issues logging in. I'm very sorry for keeping you waiting. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Howie. This is Dr. Nyambura, and we're going to be talking about sugar today. I'm just going to wait for a few more people to join us, and then I'll get started right away. Right, if you can hear me and if the sound is good, could you please let me know in the comments box? Hello, Ruth. Thank you for joining me. Hello, Kahaki. Hello, Ndogo. I'm sorry for keeping you guys waiting. That is not my style. We just had a few problems. Can everyone hear me okay? Sound is good? Thank you, Liz. Right, we have about 14, 15 people, so because we're starting a bit late, I'm going to get started right away. So just to introduce myself, I am Dr. Nyambura. I am absolutely delighted to be back on Howie again. I thank you so much, the administrators, Ruth Masharia and Faith Anyango. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties earlier, but I'm sure this will be worth your while. So my name is Dr. Nyambura. I'm a weight loss physician. I run my own weight loss clinic here in the United Kingdom. I am a trained physician and I consult clients all over the world. Okay, wonderful. So thank you so much for your support. I'm not sure if you've seen my previous videos, but they are there on my live stream or on Howie's live stream. Last time I talked about fat and the unnecessary fear of natural fat. So I hope you guys took some of what I said on board and are enjoying having lots of delicious natural fat. So today I'll be talking about sugar, and in particular, I want to dispel some of the myths surrounding sugar. And I'm just going to be having a look at the comment section as we go along, so that I can be answering questions as we go along. And for some reason, they're not auto-populating, so I'll just have to look aside and do that every so often. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Peter. Hi, Nancy. Hi, Winrose. Let's get started. So the way I've structured the talk today is I'll be talking about sugar. I'll be defining sugar, talking about the problem that we have with sugar, the sources of sugar, myths about sugar. I'll touch on sweeteners, and then I'll give you some practical tips about how you can reduce the amount of sugar in your diet. I know everyone wants to know whether honey is better than sugar, or whether molasses is better than maple syrup, or whether the body has any favorites of sugars. And you know what, we will talk about all that as soon as we discuss exactly what sugar is, so we know we're all on the same page. So sugar is what we're going to define now. So human beings eat one of three things. So we either eat carbohydrates, or we eat protein, or we eat fat. Those are the three main food groups that we eat. Now, carbohydrates is what we're going to be talking about. Within carbohydrates, you have simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. The simple carbohydrates are your sugars, and your complex carbohydrates are your starches and your fibers. So the difference between simple and complex is simply the amount of sugars within them. So simple carbohydrates have one sugar or two sugars linked together, and complex carbohydrates have more than two sugars, in many cases thousands and thousands of sugar molecules linked together. And starch is the form in which plants store energy. So we're talking about grains and potatoes and beans and legumes. And fiber is indigestible carbohydrates. Many people don't realize that actually fiber is a carbohydrate, and it's indigestible because it cannot be, the bonds that hold it together cannot be broken down by human enzymes. They're broken down by bacterial enzymes which reside within our gut. So when I talk about sugar, that from a molecular point of view, that's what we mean. That is the definition of sugar. But here is the thing. What is important, and the key is that all carbohydrates break down into sugar. So all carbohydrates, and I'm talking about starches and sugars, have to be broken down by the body, and they're broken down into simple sugars so as to be absorbed by the body. Okay, so if you eat a potato, it will be broken down into glucose, and if you eat sugar, just plain sugar, it will be broken down into glucose and fructose. It has to be broken down into the simplest of sugars so as to be absorbed by the body, and this is key. So this means that all digestible carbohydrates are or will be broken down into sugars. Now, I might be confusing you, but believe me, this is going to become important in a minute or so, especially when you try and understand the differences between sugar, added sugar, and free sugars. So the World Health Organization has given us guidance as to the amount of sugar we should be consuming. And other nations have developed their own guidance. For instance, in the National Health Service, we are advised not, in the United Kingdom, we are advised not to have any more than 7 teaspoons of sugar as an adult in a day. And they're talking about added sugars. The World Health Organization tells us we should have no more than 6 sugars a day. And I think the American Heart Association says that we shouldn't be having more than 9 tablespoons of sugar for men, and I think it's 5 for women. So it's really interesting that even these organizations that are supposed to be giving us guidance on how much sugar we should take don't actually have a consensus. So when they talk about free sugars, which is what they include in the tablespoons, they're talking about all the added sugars. So the sugars that you add to your beverages and the sugar you add to your food. And they're also talking about sugars that naturally occur in food, like honey and syrups and fruit juice, but not fruits and not milk, because milk contains lactose, which is a naturally occurring sugar. So think about this, 6 teaspoons of sugar a day. You know, I wrote an article and it's available on my website, and I'll post the link in a minute. And what I discussed in that article was I did a cross-section of what we consider a healthy diet in the United Kingdom. And believe it or not, I came up with the fact that we're consuming at least 30 teaspoons, 30 teaspoons of sugar a day in the United Kingdom. And that was actually quite generous. We're probably consuming a whole lot more. Yet we're being told to consume no more than 6 teaspoons of added sugar. So I've just explained to you that in actual fact, all starches and all sugars get broken down into sugar. Your body is not interested where those sugars came from. Sugar is sugar. And most of the sugar we consume is actually added and hidden into our food. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So that is the definition of sugar. So what is the problem with sugar? And I'm just going to have a look at our comment section just to see how it's all going. You're all there. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. If you're just tuning in, my name is Dr. Nyambura, and I'm talking about sugar. So the problem with sugar, the number one problem is, from my perspective, is that people tend to call it empty calories. So listen to me. There is nothing empty about sugar. By using the word empty, we tend to imply that there is no real issue when it comes to sugar. It's just empty calories. It doesn't matter here or there. The truth is that sugar really matters, and in excess is detrimental to our health. I don't need to tell you that the consumption of sugar has been increasing steadily over the decades, and too much sugar is indeed harmful. And that's what we're going to talk about now. The most obvious sources of harm are what we already know, tooth decay. But I'm going to give you some statistics that you may not be aware of. Did you know that 50% of children in the United Kingdom have a tooth extracted before the age of 15? And this is because of tooth decay from too much sugar. I didn't realize this until I looked it up a few weeks ago. And what I also didn't realize is that tooth extractions are the number one reason for child admissions into hospital. And they're being admitted into hospital because they need a general anesthetic so as to perform that tooth extraction. So what that seems to me is that it's the tip of the iceberg. If those are the amount of tooth extractions happening within the hospital, how many are happening in the community, just in the dentist's office? 170 tooth extractions are carried out every single day in the United Kingdom. 170. That is more than 50,000 tooth extractions a year. And it might surprise you that teenagers have been found to consume about a bathtub of soda a year. A bathtub of soda a year. So the other issue with sugar, and this is my interest, is from the metabolic point of view. Now, there is a well-established connection between, consuming excess sugar and the metabolic syndrome or metabolic disease. And what I'm talking about here is obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancers, Alzheimer's disease, fatty liver disease. Sugar in excess has been directly linked with the metabolic conditions that I've just described. And the reason for that is because excessive sugar starts off this process that we now understand to be called insulin resistance. And if you watched my very first video, I described what insulin resistance was. And I'll do that again briefly for the benefit of the people who haven't watched the first video. Insulin is a hormone released by your body in response to foods. The food that causes the biggest peak in your insulin is simple carbohydrates. And I'm talking about processed carbohydrates and sugars. So these cause a very, very large spike in your insulin because the job of insulin is to take all that sugar in the bloodstream and push it inside the cell so that the conditions can remain safe. That is the job of insulin. What people fail to realize is that what insulin also does is that it converts any excess sugar that it finds in the bloodstream directly into fat. And that fat is called triglycerides. So insulin is your fat storage hormone. If you consume excess sugars, those sugars get converted immediately into fat and then are stored in your cells. That is the function of the hormone insulin. So when people tell me that they're having a non-diet Coke and they say it's a sugary Coke, I say actually that's a full fat Coke. That's exactly what I mean when I say a full fat Coke. All that excess sugar will be converted into fat. And this fat builds up in the liver and causes insulin resistance of the liver. Insulin resistance means that the cells can no longer accept any more glucose into them, and therefore insulin can no longer work. And what happens is the body then has to produce even more insulin to overcome the insulin resistance. And then you can see the vicious cycle that happens. Eventually, no amount of sugar can be pushed into the cells. The blood sugar level rises. This is when people go to their doctor and they have a blood test and they discover that they are diabetic. But now you can see that the process has been happening for years, leading up to that point of diagnosis. That's what insulin resistance is. And insulin resistance underpins all the metabolic conditions, including diabetes. And I've just explained that, that sugar is directly connected to these diseases. So it might surprise you to know that at any one point in a healthy body, you only have 1 teaspoon, an equivalent of 1 teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream. 1 teaspoon. That is the power of insulin. It does everything it can to push all that sugar into the cells. Have you ever asked yourself why? Why is it so important for insulin to do that? Why is it so important to remove sugar so efficiently and so quickly into the cells so that it doesn't stay in the bloodstream? The reason for that is sugar is very toxic. High blood glucose is very toxic to cells, to blood vessels, and to organs. And therefore, the best thing insulin can do is to squeeze it into the cells as quickly as possible. And when it fails to do that, because of years and years and years of high sugar consumption, then you get full-blown diabetes. That's what happens. The other problem with sugar is that it's addictive. Did you know that there were studies done on rodents, on rats, that showed that sugar is 8 times more addictive than cocaine. 8 times more addictive than cocaine. Now, I know you're thinking you're not a rat, but the truth is that whenever we study rodents, as we do in science, and we then study human beings, more often than not, we find similar findings, similar conclusions. You and I can testify to needing that sugar high, to wanting that sugar high. Every time we consume sugar, we experience an unbelievable pleasure. And it's that reward, that pleasure, that hits the reward centers in our brain and makes us crave more. So whether you want to call it addiction or whether you want to call it habit forming, the difference is the same as far as I'm concerned. So sugar affects your teeth, it affects your metabolism, and it affects your brain in terms of its addiction. So let's move on to the sources of sugar, because now we're getting to the point where you're going to understand where this is all coming from. And I'm just going to hit the comment section again. So where is our sugar coming from? So there's obvious sources of sugar and less obvious sources of sugar. So the obvious sources of sugar are the added sugars. So your candy, your confectionery, your chocolate, your biscuits, your cereals, and so on, your jams. So we all know that these contain sugar. We don't need to be told. What about the less obvious sources of sugar? What about the sugar that's hidden in our foods? Like hidden in processed foods like yogurt, ketchup, bread, pasta sauces, ready meals, roasted nuts. What about our processed soups? Have you ever taken the time to look at the nutrition label at the back? And if you have you ever noticed how ubiquitous sugar is in all processed food? And remember why. I talked about this in my last video. When the dietary guidelines were set, they took fat out of the food. And in doing so, they inadvertently encouraged people to consume more carbohydrates. And in doing that, that included more sugar. Because if you take fat out of food, it tastes like cardboard. So you have to put sugar in and other additives for it to taste of anything so that consumers can buy it. And that is how they add sugar into the food. One, for its deliciousness, and also because it helps the food last longer. It spoils less. So those are your hidden sugars. But what about your less obvious sugars, even more less obvious than what's hidden in processed food? Have you ever thought about the cereals, the breads, the pasta? These are the foods that we are being told, we are being encouraged to eat. We're being told we should have 55% of our diet should be these carbohydrates: pastas, breads, cereals, potatoes. I have just described earlier what happens in our body when we consume starch. When we consume starches, of which cereals, breads, and pasta are, they all get broken down into glucose before they are digested. So whether your body takes the glucose from sugar, table sugar, or whether it gets the glucose from your digested potato, it is still glucose, and it is still handled identically by the body. This is what we need to understand. So if you step back and look at our dietary guidelines, and you see that they're encouraging us to have a diet of more than half of starches, you can see how we get sugar loaded immediately. In doing so, they're encouraging people to consume a lot of sugar. Now, granted, a potato is healthier than a bar of chocolate, but what I'm saying is this: at the end of the day, after digestion, all digestible carbohydrates are broken down into sugars. That is the only way they are absorbed. Your body couldn't care less where they came from. That is the truth. Now, we've talked about the cereals, we've talked about bread, we've talked about pasta. What about fruit? Whole fruit, yes, that is nature's candy. That contains, it contains sugars, glucose, and fructose. And there's nothing wrong with whole fruit. But what about fruit juice? What about smoothies? Now we have a problem, because what you're then doing is when you're making juice, what they do, or what you do in your kitchen, is that you concentrate all the moisture that you take out into a very, very highly concentrated sugar source. And what you leave behind is all the fiber. Now, think about this. Nature has created fruit to contain sugar, but to also contain fiber. So when you decide to juice your fruit and you strip it of that fiber, and you end up with a concentrated sugar solution, there is nothing natural about that. And I keep saying to people that apples are natural, but apple juice is not. We have not adapted or evolved to handle that amount of sugar in one go. It takes about 4 or 5 large carrots to make a glass of carrot juice, which you can consume in a minute. But how long would it take you to eat 4 or 5 whole carrots? It would take a long time because of the chewing and the digestion, and the fiber would fill you up before you had your third one. So this is the issue with juicing. Juicing makes a natural product into an unnatural product. And then we wonder why we're getting fatter and why we're getting sicker. So apple juice can contain as much or more sugar than a can of Coca-Cola. And I think as soon as you start turning and looking at the nutrition label, you will see what I'm saying. At the end of the day, sugar is sugar. Once it's converted into glucose, your body does not care whether it came from a Coca-Cola or whether it came from freshly squeezed apple juice. It's still sugar, and it will be handled the same way in your body. What surprises me to this day is the number of names of sugar that have come up. I mean, up till now, I think I've seen about 52 different names of sugar. They call it high fructose corn syrup, brown sugar, dextrose, rice bran extract, malt extract. It's all sugar. They come up with all these names so as to confuse consumers when you're trying to decipher what the nutrition label is telling you. That's why they do it. Because sugar is delicious. It makes food edible. But if they just had sugar everywhere, people would be wary. So why not call it malt extract? Why not call it bran extract? Why not call it rice syrup extract? Because then you're not really sure that you're having sugar. So those are your sources of sugar. And I'll repeat and say that the main source of sugar nowadays is actually the sugar that's hidden in our foods. So let's come to the good stuff now. And I'm coming on to the myth surrounding sugar. And if you're just joining us, thank you so much. I'm going to read all the comments in a minute. Yes, the juicing is very interesting. Absolutely. Sugar is still sugar. And if you want to know more about juicing and smoothies, I've written an article that's available freely on my website, and it's quite an eye-opener. You know, at the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you what to do or what to eat. I'm here to give you information in a factual way. And therefore, you can make an informed decision about what you feed yourself and what you feed your family. I feel very strongly that big food and big food industries have confused us. And therefore, how can you make an informed decision if you're confused and if they're not declaring what exactly is in our food? That is what I try to do here with these live videos. I try and tell you what's in your food, and then you go ahead and make the decision as to what you want to do. Right, so let's talk about the myth surrounding sugar. And the number one myth I'm going to start with is this whole idea of us needing to stabilize our blood sugar. Now, for as long as I've been aware of sugar and weight and being fat, I have known about this phenomenon, about us needing to stabilize our blood sugar levels during the day. What utter nonsense. What utter nonsense. There is no, listen to this. Regulating your blood sugar is what keeps you alive. If your blood sugar was to drop dangerously low, and dangerously low means only by 1 or 2 points, you would go into a coma, then you would go into a seizure, and then you would die. If your blood sugar rises above what is acceptable for your body, you develop diabetes, which is an incredibly dangerous disease. So your body is able to very, very tightly regulate the amount of sugar in your blood. So this idea that you need to eat 5 or 6 times a day, small meals, 5 or 6 times a day to regulate your blood sugar is utter nonsense. And it's actually quite dangerous. Your liver and your other organs are perfectly well adapted and efficiently cope with regulating your blood sugar. So if you don't eat any carbohydrates, if you ate 0 carbohydrates, a total ketogenic diet, and many, many millions of people are on ketogenic diets, they do not fall over. If you measured their blood sugar remains stable throughout that diet. There is a man who fasted for, I think, 382 days. I think the guy lived in Scotland, and he did not eat anything for 382 days. He did not die. He did not need to stabilize his blood sugar. Our liver, in particular, is exquisitely able to do this without our assistance. If you don't eat any sugar or any carbohydrates, there is a process called gluconeogenesis. Gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, genesis meaning to create. And that simply means that your liver will create glucose from something else. It will create it from fat, and it will create it from protein. Or it can even create it from a substance called lactate. Other organs like your kidneys can do that as well, but your liver does it primarily. So please, you do not have any business eating several times a day to regulate your blood sugar. Your body does that for you, and it does it far better than you ever could. The danger of eating 5 or 6 times a day is that you just keep spiking your insulin levels throughout the day. You eat, your blood sugar goes high, your insulin level goes high. And you do that over and over and over again during the day. If you do that for long enough, then you develop insulin resistance because of the very high levels of insulin that you've kept your body at throughout the day. Don't do it. That is myth number 1. You do not need to regulate your blood sugar. The reason why you have your afternoon slump is almost certainly related to what you ate for lunch. If you had a sandwich with crisps and a Coke, no wonder you have an afternoon slump. Those foods increase your blood sugar very, very quickly, and therefore they increase your blood insulin just as quickly. Remember, insulin will drop that blood sugar right down to a healthy, safe level. And it does that very, very quickly. So within a matter of hours, you're very shaky and you're very cranky. Why? Because what you're experiencing is not a low blood sugar. You're experiencing a relatively lower blood sugar from where you started. So you started here and you're experiencing here. That's what you're experiencing. A true low blood sugar is down here. Do you understand? So when you're experiencing those shakes, it's simply because your blood sugar has gone from 7 until 4 or from 10 until 5. What you experience is that relative drop. But that is not the definition of low blood sugar. That is not hypoglycemia. Myth number 2. I hope you're all with me. If there's anything you want me to clarify, please pop it in the comment section, and you guys know that I respond to those all the time. Okay, so the second myth is about fructose, that fructose is somehow good because fructose is mainly found in fruits. Now, I want to tell you this, the fructose that is found in normal fruit, just a whole fruit, that is perfectly healthy fructose. Remember that sugar, table sugar, is 1 molecule of fructose and 1 molecule of glucose. That's what table sugar is, sucrose. Fruits contain both. So fruits contain fructose and glucose in varying proportions. And if you're to eat an apple, that amount of fructose your body can handle. I have just told you about my issue with juicing and with things like high fructose corn syrup. When we process things and concentrate the amount of sugars, then we have a problem. I say this all the time. The toxicity lies in the processing. The toxicity lies in the processing. And fructose is a classic example of a toxin at high doses. In fact, we call it a dose-dependent hepatotoxin. And what that means is that it is a dose-dependent liver toxin. So the more you eat, the more dangerous it is. Now, doesn't this remind you of alcohol? The thing is, the body handles alcohol almost identically to how it handles excess fructose. You can have a drink and be absolutely fine. Your liver will do its job, and before you know it, the alcohol is out of your system. Similarly, you can have a chocolate cake or a drink of apple juice and be fine. But if you do that meal by meal, day to day, year on year, and then it starts to build up as a toxin. And that's why fructose is dangerous. For that reason, one, when it's in its concentrated form, it behaves like alcohol. It is only metabolized by the liver. Glucose can be metabolized by every other cell in the body, but fructose is only metabolized in the liver. So this is the danger of having sugar, as in table sugar, because table sugar is glucose and fructose. So the glucose part will enter your bloodstream, and too much of it will be turned into fat and make you fat. The fructose part of it will go only to your liver, which is already overwhelmed, and in excess, your liver will convert that into fat. So look at the double blow we have just created. That is a problem with fructose. And it's funny, fructose is many, many times sweeter than glucose. And in many countries, particularly in the United States, fructose is a preferred sweetener because you need much, much less of it to experience a sweet taste. Okay, so fructose is not good for you in excess. It is not. Myth number 3, brown sugar is better. No, brown sugar is not better than white sugar. The reason brown sugar is brown is because it contains molasses. At the end of the day, once that sugar is digested, it is still digested into glucose and fructose, just like white sugar. Your body doesn't know, neither is it interested in the source of that sugar. It is still sugar. So brown sugar, white sugar, I don't know, they display it in the restaurant as though one is more virtuous than the other. What nonsense. Sugar is sugar. And particularly when we're talking about table sugar, there is no preferred sugar. As far as your body is concerned, it's one and the same thing. Now, let's talk about molasses, another myth. Somebody was asking me about molasses on my Facebook feed. Molasses is the product that is left over once sugarcane or sugar beets have been processed. And I think it has to go through several boils. And then it's this black trickle, or some people call it black strap molasses. So yes, it is slightly lower in sugar in terms of quantity, but still 100 grams of molasses contains 75 grams of sugar. So molasses by weight contains 3/4 sugar. Now, in fairness, unlike table sugar, which has zero nutrition, molasses is very high in magnesium and it's also high in calcium and iron. But the truth is, you need to consume an awful lot of the molasses to benefit from those micronutrients. But in doing so, you will be consuming an unacceptable amount of sugar. So what I'll tell you is that if you're consuming molasses for the sugar and you're not overweight, that's fine. Do it in moderation. If you're consuming molasses because you think it's healthier than table sugar and you are overweight, don't. If you're consuming molasses because of its nutrition benefit, don't, because you cannot consume enough of it to get your recommended daily allowance of the nutrition that you're seeking. So molasses is not particularly more superior than table sugar. And neither is honey. Honey, and I'm going to talk about particularly Manuka honey. Manuka honey is a special type of honey that is known and revered for its antibacterial properties. Now, the truth is that Manuka honey and all honeys are still very, very high in sugar. The vast majority of that product is still sugar. And we've talked about the fact, and I know I sound like a broken record, but I'm telling you that once you digest honey, once you digest molasses, once you digest brown sugar, it's still sugar. The body doesn't care where it originated from. It's still sugar. So if you're trying to cut down on your sugar intake, these foods are not advantageous. So the other problem I have with honey is that, yes, it is much, much higher in sugar than molasses. Per 100 grams of honey, you have 82 grams of sugar. Remember, per 100 grams of molasses, you have 75 grams of sugar. Honey is really good from an antibacterial point of view, but only topically. What that means is that we use honey in hospitals for its medicinal value in healing wounds. So we use it externally. I also recommend honey, and I use it myself when I have a sore throat and I gargle it. I don't swallow it because of the unacceptable amount of sugar. Now, here is where we need to make the distinction. Honey cannot be sold as a superfood while ignoring its metabolic effect. That is incorrect. You have to, when I tell people about honey, I say, yes, there are antibacterial properties, but there's also a metabolic effect. One is not more important than the other. And certainly, in a world where almost 60% of the population is overweight or obese, we have to have the conversation about how much sugar there is in honey. So I'm not saying that it is not useful. Yes, it's useful, but it's only been proven useful externally, not internally. That is a point we need to remember. So I don't want you to be consuming honey in the thought that it is going to help you on the inside as well as it helps you on the outside. That is incorrect. It has a huge metabolic impact because it's packed with sugar. So the science about use of antibacterial, honey as an antibacterial agent is inconclusive out with what we know about wound healing. So we don't really know whether honey is as good as antibiotics. We just don't have any evidence for that. And unfortunately, a lot of these molecules where the antibacterial properties lie, these molecules do not survive digestion. I don't know whether you know this, but your stomach is full of hydrochloric acid. This is a powerful, powerful acid, and it's there to kill all sorts of bugs. But unfortunately, it kills all sorts of things, including some of the helpful molecules in honey. So there is another reason to not consume honey for those reasons. Maple syrup is another one. Someone asked me this only yesterday. Yes, it is still unacceptably high in sugar. I understand what you're saying. It's a natural product. I get that. But at the end of the day, 2/3 of the weight of maple syrup is pure unadulterated sugar. And if you're struggling with your weight, you cannot be consuming this food. You just can't. Maple syrup is very high in vitamin B12 and it's very high in manganese, but it's very low in everything else. So if you're consuming vast quantities of maple syrup so as to get the B2 and so it was B2, not B12, so as to get benefits from a vitamin and a mineral point of view, don't do it. There are other ways to get your B vitamins and your manganese in without shooting your insulin levels through the roof. For example, B2 is found in plenty in liver and lamb and red meat, and manganese is found in pulses like chickpeas and beans and things like that. So there are other foods that are very, very low in sugar that can give you that benefit. So do not consume maple syrup thinking that it is healthful. For maple syrup in particular, I wrote down here that you need 15 teaspoons of maple syrup a day to get 100% of your B vitamin and your manganese. 15 teaspoons. So there's no chance of me recommending maple syrup as a healthful sweetener. Okay. How are we doing with the comments? I hope you're finding this all useful. If you've just joined, my name is Dr. Nyambura. I'm talking about sugar today. I know the World Cup is on. In fact, I wasn't even expecting quite so many people to be watching. I'm so grateful. Thank you very much. We're talking about sugar. And so far, I have said that your body doesn't care the source of sugar. Sugar is sugar. Let me talk about sweeteners. Someone asked me that as well. Sweeteners are incredibly popular because of this very sexy idea that you can have the sweetness without the calories. Now, there are two types of sweeteners. You have artificial sweeteners and you have natural sweeteners. Your artificial sweeteners are things like aspartame, which you will normally find in soda, and your natural sweeteners are things like stevia. And these are the ones that you will add to your tea or coffee. And they're used to sweeten some foods. Now, I am not an expert on artificial sweeteners, but this is what I know. I know that, one, they are unnatural in terms of the artificial sweeteners. So the artificial sweeteners are unnatural, and they are therefore cannot be recommended as part of a real food diet. The natural sweeteners are natural, but like sugar itself, the toxicity lies in the processing. So these natural and artificial sweeteners are actually quite new. We don't actually have any long-term data to tell us that we can safely consume these in abundance. We just don't have the data. And in the absence of that, and the fact that it is a processed product, or the fact that it's an artificial product, I do not recommend them. They're also intensely sweet. So you only need a tiny amount to hit the sweet centers in your brain. And what I know is, if you keep hitting your tongue and your brain with this sweetness, eventually other foods, including fruit, start to taste quite bland. And then, of course, things like vegetables are an absolute no-no, because, you know, that will hit your tongue and it will be so, the sourness and the tartness will be amplified, simply because you're so used to tasting that level of sweetness. That level of sweetness will also confuse your brain to keep seeking more sweetness. So I don't think it actually solves the problem. I think once you start eating sugary and sweet foods, whether they're real or fake, you continue wanting sweet foods. And my other big issue with sweeteners, and this is a recent study published in Science, is that they can actually affect the gut bacteria. And we know that they can negatively affect the health of your gut bacteria. And this is what I mean when we say we don't have any long-term data. You know, you don't want to be discovering in 15 years' time that the sweetener you're consuming now has done harm to your body, irreversible harm. So what I say to people is, cut down your natural sugars, avoid your artificial sugars, and wean yourself off all sugars. It doesn't make any sense to introduce things that are not natural to the body, and certainly not proven to be safe long term. So from the sweeteners point of view, I don't know what you guys think, but I would not be recommending it at all. In fact, the only time I recommend artificial sweeteners is people who are really quite addicted to things like a Coca-Cola. And so what I do for a period of time in my clinic, I will have them have diet colas and diet drinks. But I do that knowing very well that we will be discontinuing that in the very, very near future. And it won't become a staple. So we've got that far. And now, and I'm right on time. I didn't want to have more than an hour today because I do tend to go over. You now understand that a lot of the sugars we have are hidden sugars. And now I'm just going to show you a few examples of what we're talking about. So the first example I have is this, and this is Kellogg's Cocoa Pops. Now, first of all, this is just sugar. I don't know how else I can put this mildly. This is probably the most awful thing you can feed yourself and your family. This is utter and complete garbage. And they tell us that a serving of Cocoa Pops contains 9 grams of sugar, and that's about 2 teaspoons of sugar. But that is not true, because Cocoa Pops is just simple carbohydrates. It's simple stuff. It's just starch and sugar combined. And remember, when your body digests this all becomes sugar. So eventually, you get 6 teaspoons of sugar in 1 serving of Cocoa Pops. 6 teaspoons of sugar. And remember, the World Health Organization doesn't want you to have any more than 6 teaspoons in a day. And if you eat a proper bowlful, and a proper bowlful is 60 grams, not 30 grams like they write it there, then immediately you have consumed 6 teaspoons of sugar. Here is another example. This is a low-fat yogurt called Phage, 0%, and it's filled with honey. This tub of yogurt alone contains 7 teaspoons of sugar. 7 teaspoons of sugar in this tub. Now, if you think about it, a can of Coca-Cola contains 9 teaspoons of sugar. And this is what you're feeding your children in the morning, thinking it's any better. The truth is that, first of all, I have no idea why they took out the fat. Fat doesn't make you fat. Sugar makes you fat. We have already had that discussion. But if you give your child Cocoa Pops and yogurt for breakfast, I mean, this is already 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 grams of sugar before you've even left the house. Now, these yogurts are the brand new sugar delivery systems because the food industry is very clever and sales of sodas and soft drinks are falling. So they have to find a way to get us to continue to consume their products. And so they come up with these things. This is just a sugar bomb. Here is another one. It's called Sky. It's another yogurt. They say it's high in protein, and they're also exalting it for being fat-free. This little tub contains 5 teaspoons of sugar in this little tub. 5 teaspoons of sugar. These are the new sugar delivery systems. So that I don't want you to be thinking about sugar as what you add to your food. But the food industry are very inventive and they're very clever and they know what we like. And they've hidden sugar inside our food, inside these foods that we think of as healthy, inside juices, inside cereals, inside all those things. So what can we do about this? Well, the first thing we can do is recognize that the dietary guidelines are actually incorrect. When we are being told to consume half our plate of starches, what I want you to now recognize is that all that starch is going to become sugar in your body, all of it. And this is independent of the 6 teaspoons they're asking you to, they're telling you you can have no more of. That is only added sugar. That is not what I'm talking about here. The starch and carbohydrates they're encouraging us to take also get converted into sugar. And remember, all sugar in excess gets converted into fat, and this is the fat that gets inside and around our organs, and that's what makes us sick. Sugar is everywhere. It's in schools. All school dinners have got a pudding option. All our celebrations, our weddings, our birthdays, even funerals, Valentine's, Easter, Christmas, all our celebrations revolve around sugar. Our hospitals have vending machines that contain nothing but sugar. Our gyms, the same. Sugar is everywhere, everywhere. So it's become a staple. And I had written a post on Facebook saying it's really quite disappointing that sugar is no longer a treat. It's now a staple. We are consuming vast, vast quantities of sugar, and they are hiding it in our food. And we need to do something about it. So what can you do? And this is what I tell my clients all the time. I tell them that you need to cut out all the soft drinks to start with. You need to cut out all the sweets and chocolates and confectionery and biscuits significantly. You need to stop drinking juice and smoothies. And you need to put the fat back in instead of the sugar. So you need to replace sugar with fat. In other words, you need to ignore the dietary guidelines and put the fat back in and take the sugar out. Because what they did is that they took the fat out and put the sugar in. And we have never been sicker and we have never been fatter. So no, thank you. That has never worked. It's not worked for 50 years and it's not going to work now. We need to be cutting down on our sugar as I've just described. Remember that this is all added sugar. This doesn't even include your starches, but your body doesn't care. If you don't cut these things out, then you're eating that in addition to your starches, which otherwise wouldn't have a problem. And your body is converting the lot into freely available sugar that's making you sick. I hope you're still with me. I hope that has been relatively clear. I really wanted you to understand that our food has been seriously adulterated. it's been spiked with sugar. Sugar is all around us. And you just need to read the labels a little bit more carefully to know what's going on. I'm just going to have a look at the comment section because I'm nearly done, just to see what everyone's saying. Yes, so you're all agreeing with me about the smoothies and the juicing. Absolutely. My comments are not loading up very well. So someone says, I disagree with some of your points. At times it's natural sugar, and food manufacturers can't do anything about it. Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure what I don't think you're disagreeing. I think you are agreeing. All I'm saying is that the biggest source of our sugar now is hidden in processed food. That is the biggest source of our sugar. That is a matter of fact. The sugar that manufacturers can't do anything about is, sugar in fruits. That's true, and sugar in honey. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that your body doesn't know the difference. It just doesn't. So it's prudent to understand what you're consuming so that you can make an informed choice of how much sugar you want to eat. Yes, the juicing point was taken. For some reason, I can't see any other comments. What's going on here? Let's have a look. Sugar is sugar, Irene. Yeah, sugar is sugar. Apples are natural. Apple juice is not. Yep, that is a take-home message for Caroline. Absolutely. Let's see some of your other comments. No, I'm delighted that you guys joined me. Shall I summarize? Because I can't really see all there's about 80 comments, but I don't know, for some reason I can't see them. But, thank you for watching the video. I think from what the feedback that I've had, you find it very useful. What I want to say is, this is a passion of mine. I'm a fervent anti-sugar campaigner. I think we should all be reverting back to real food, just as nature intended. I think if we do that, we would all be better off, certainly from a metabolic point of view. And also, I think that we've been ill-informed. I think a lot of manufacturers and scientists have confused us. I think we don't really know what happens to our body, and that is when we consume these sugars. And that's what I have tried to do in this past hour. As always, I'm always available, and if you want some advice, as long as it's generic advice, I'm happy to give that. If you're interested in consultations, I consult all over the world. Just drop me a message and I will slot you into the insulin calendar. You can start losing weight right away. For my clients and my friends in Nairobi, I'll be in Nairobi next month, and I'm holding consultations as well. So if you'd like to get to know me and meet me and see if my program is something that would be suitable for you, I'd be delighted to see you in Nairobi next month. Just drop me a message, a private message, and let me know. So thank you so much. I'm going to leave it there, almost exactly 1 hour. And I'm very grateful for you guys tuning in. Watch the rest of the videos, drop your sugar intake, and let me know what you'd like me to speak about next time. Thank you, and bye-bye.